Crater's Hollow lay nestled within a rugged expanse, bordered by jagged peaks that seemed to pierce the sky. The land, arid and unforgiving, was both the lifeblood and the grave of those who toiled upon it. Dust coated the remnants of long-abandoned lanes, rusted implements sticking out like gravestones in a forgotten cemetery. Farmers scratched a living from the parched earth, every season a battle against nature's indifference and the ever-looming threat of an outlaw. The callous reign of Finch Rawley permeated every corner of the basin, unraveling what tight-knit community existed among the sparse homesteads. News of his brutal exploits spread like wildfire, tales of men who had dared to defy him, only to end up as dark memories etched into the soil where they fell. Families lived in constant tension, hearts pounding at the sound of hoofbeats echoing against the desolate landscape, recognizing that each season brought threats far graver than poor crops. Finch demanded tribute with sinister confidence, and any farmer who hesitated to comply faced not only loss but violence that shattered lives entirely. The law turned a blind eye to Crater's Hollow, outlaws thrived where justice was absent, and among these oppressed folk was Walter Miller. He too bore the weight of Finch's cruelty on his shoulders, however it was a weight shaped by loss, a haunting specter lingering even after years had passed. As he gazed at his crumbling cabin surrounded by pale fields that once blossomed with hope, Walter could almost hear echoes of laughter that faded away in Finch's wake. In this isolated hollow, fear clung to each person as relentlessly as the dust across the land. Yet change whispered between the cracks, a quiet, simmering rebellion awaited its chance to emerge from the shadows. Walter's heart beat anew with purpose. It was time for fear to turn into defiance. Finch Rawley's rise to infamy was as swift as it was ruthless, carved from the very desperation that plagued Crater's Hollow. Born to a family of outlaws, Finch learned early that power lay in fear and violence. He witnessed his father's brutal reign, which ended when rival gangs finally turned on him, leaving Finch orphaned and hardened. Fueled by vengeance and a hunger for dominance, he took up his father's mantle, amassing a gang of equally unscrupulous men who reveled in chaos. With each passing season, Finch cultivated a reputation that spread like wildfire through the region. He became a specter haunting the dreams of farmers, riding through the basin with a menacing grin and a band of loyal henchmen. His methods were calculated. He didn't just demand tribute, he made examples of those who dared to resist. Homes were burned to the ground, and the cries of those who opposed him echoed through the desolation, forever marking the land with their suffering. Finch had a keen understanding of human nature. He knew how to exploit fear to maintain control over the terrified farmers. His presence alone was enough to silence whispers of rebellion. Men who had once stood shoulder to shoulder crumbled under pressure, their resolve shattered at the sight of Finch's menacing figure. They watched helplessly as their neighbors disappeared or returned home broken and battered after confrontations with the outlaw. But there was more to Finch than pure brutality. He possessed an eerie charisma that drew followers to him. His gang believed in his vision of a lawless world where they could thrive without restraint. However, beneath the bravado lurked insecurity, a fear that his reign could end as swiftly as it began. As Walter Miller contemplated this dark legacy while gripping the remnants of his past, it became increasingly clear. Finch's tyranny had created not just victims but also a simmering rage waiting for a spark. The balance of power was fragile, and time would soon reveal whether darkness would continue to reign or if a new chapter awaited Crater's Hollow. Walter Miller was a figure shaped by hardship and loss, a one-armed farmer whose resilience had been tested time and again in the unforgiving landscape of Crater's Hollow. The remnant of his missing limb served as a painful reminder of a time when he had the strength to defend his family and fight for his land. With each passing day, as he limped through the dry fields alongside his half-dead mule, he felt the weight of memories pressing down on him like the oppressive heat of the sun. Years ago, Walter had been a vibrant man, full of hope and ambition. He and his wife, Clara, dreamed of cultivating their small plot into a thriving farm. But that dream was shattered on one fateful night when Finch Rawley's men came crashing through their lives like wildfire. The brutal murder of Clara left Walter not just with physical scars, but with an emotional abyss that threatened to consume him. The empty space beside him at the dinner table echoed with her laughter, now silenced forever. His cabin, once a warm home filled with love, had become a crumbling shell, much like his spirit. Walter often found himself staring out at the fields they had tended together, haunted by visions of what could have been. Despite this overwhelming grief, he had continued to labor, driven by a flicker of hope that perhaps one day he could reclaim some semblance of peace or justice. Yet Finch's tyranny loomed over him like a dark cloud. Walter had learned to live in silence, observing the terror that gripped his neighbors, but beneath his stoic exterior lay a deep well of rage, a fire stoked by memories of Clara and the injustices inflicted upon him and his community. With every tribute Finch demanded, and every act of cruelty enacted upon them, that fire grew stronger within Walter, waiting for a moment to ignite into something more formidable than mere survival. The quiet man who toiled in solitude was on the brink of becoming something much more dangerous, ready to rise against the darkness that had stolen everything from him. The night of Clara's murder was etched into Walter's mind like a scar that would never heal. He could still recall the sounds, the distant laughter of their neighbors fading into silence, replaced by the thunderous hoofbeats that heralded Finch Rawley's arrival. The moon hung low in the sky, casting eerie shadows across their modest cabin as Walter tended to the evening chores, blissfully unaware that darkness was creeping closer. As he stepped outside, a chill ran down his spine. The air was thick with tension, and the familiar sounds of Crater's Hollow felt strangely muted. Then, chaos erupted. Finch's men stormed onto their property, faces masked in cruelty and intent. Walter rushed to protect Clara, but he was too late. She was already caught in their grasp. He watched in horror as they dragged her away, her cries piercing the night like a blade. "Please, let her go," he had shouted, desperation clawing at his throat. But his pleas fell on deaf ears, drowned out by the mocking laughter of those who thrived on fear. In that moment of helplessness, Walter felt something inside him shatter, an irreversible fracture crafted by grief and rage. Then came the gunfire, a single shot that echoed through the hollow, marking the end of his world. As he stumbled forward, he saw Clara crumple to the ground, her vibrant spirit extinguished in an instant. Walter knelt beside her lifeless body, cradling her head in his arms while tears streamed down his weathered face. The warmth of her blood seeped into the earth beneath them, merging with the soil that had once nurtured their dreams. From that night onward, Walter became a ghost among the living. He buried Clara beneath a willow tree they had planted together, a symbol of hope now forever shrouded in sorrow. Each day since had been a relentless reminder of what he had lost, his laughter stolen alongside his wife's life. Yet within that gaping void lay seeds of vengeance waiting to sprout. A quiet fury simmered beneath his surface, promising that one day he would make Finch Rawley pay for the darkness he had unleashed upon their lives. Each season brought a palpable sense of dread to Crater's Hollow as the time approached for Finch Rawley's tribute collection. Like clockwork, the outlaw would ride in with his gang, a procession of horsemen that darkened the horizon and cast long shadows over the land. Farmers braced themselves, knowing that Finch's arrival meant playing a brutal game of survival, one that none could afford to lose. Finch's first appearance would often come with a booming command, echoing through the valley like thunder. His presence demanded compliance, and his men exuded an intimidating aura, hardened by a lifestyle built on violence and fear. They paraded their weapons openly, gleaming in the sunlight as if to remind the farmers of what awaited those who dared to defy them. Whispers of resistance flitted through the community like autumn leaves, but each hushed conversation was met with wary glances and fearful silence. As Finch rode through the heart of Crater's Hollow, he ensured every farmer felt his eyes upon them, a predator surveying its prey. He would stop at homesteads, demand their harvests without hesitation, and watch as families reluctantly handed over their hard-earned goods. There were no negotiations, only acquiescence or retribution. Hunger gnawed at their bellies, but fear kept them compliant. The sight of empty homes where defiance had once thrived was a constant reminder of what had happened to those who stood against him. On one particularly tense occasion, Finch targeted a family that had recently lost their crops and was unable to provide tribute. The outlaw's laughter intermingled with their cries as they were forcibly pulled from their home, leaving behind echoes of despair that festered in the hearts of all who witnessed it. The chilling reality was that fear reigned supreme. The law never came here to protect them. Only chains of submission bound them to Finch's whims. As Walter watched these scenes unfold from afar, each act of cruelty marked another layer of grief within him. A deepening resolve began to take shape amidst the rising tide of oppression. The cycle of tribute collection served not only as a reminder of his losses, but as fuel for the fire smoldering within him, igniting thoughts of upheaval against a regime built on terror. Each tribute collected was not merely an obligation fulfilled, it became a promise whispered among those who remained, a promise that one day they would rise against their tormentor. The tension in Crater's Hollow reached a breaking point when Finch Rawley, having grown tired of the farmer's reluctance, devised a cruel new strategy to ensure compliance: the abduction of Walter Miller's teenage daughter, Anna. It was early morning when the gang came. They stormed into Walter's yard during a moment of vulnerability, and the horror unfolded with breathtaking speed. Walter, lost in a moment of routine chores, heard Anna's shrill scream slice through the dawn silence, only to turn and see her being dragged away by one of Finch's men. "Let her go," he shouted, lunging forward despite his frail body. But there were too many of them, too many memories of loss weighing him down. The image of Clara flashed in his mind like an all-consuming fire. As he struggled against their grip, Finch himself appeared with that insidious grin plastered across his face. "Just a little collateral, old man," he taunted, savoring Walter's desperation. "You'll get her back once I have what I'm owed." Walter felt a surge of helplessness like never before. It was one thing to bear the burden of his own pain, it was an entirely different torment to see his child threatened. He could hear Anna crying out for him as they pulled her into the shadows, pushing aside the years he had spent building walls around his heart to protect himself from more loss. In that moment, something shifted within him. The grief and simmering rage that had brewed for so long erupted into a volcanic resolve. The world around him faded to nothing but white noise as a seed of vengeance took root deep within. No longer would he allow fear to paralyze him, no longer would he remain a victim in this twisted charade. As Finch rode away with Anna, Walter clutched his half-dead mule for support, eyes filled with determination. The quiet man who had once lived under the crushing weight of despair was awakening into something far more powerful, a father determined to fight not just for retribution, but for everything that was worth saving. Each heartbeat resonated with purpose. He would outsmart Finch and reclaim his daughter from the grasp of darkness that threatened their lives once again. The time for silence had passed, the time for action was here. As the dust settled from Finch Rawley's violent departure, Walter stood alone in the yard, a whirlwind of emotions crashing over him like turbulent waves. The abduction of Anna had shattered the fragile calm he had maintained since Clara's death, and now a fierce transformation was taking shape within him. The fear that had long paralyzed him began to dissipate, replaced by a burning desire to fight, not just for his daughter, but for the memory of his wife and the dignity of all the farmers who had suffered under Finch's reign. Walter's heart raced as he envisioned the stark landscape of Crater's Hollow, not as a prison but as an ally. The fields, once mere patches of earth he tilled in despair, became potential battlegrounds where he could outsmart Finch's men. The chains of grief that had bound him for years were breaking. Love for Anna ignited a spark within him, urging him to remember the man he once was, the man who fought for what mattered. No longer would he cower in the shadows of his loss. Now he envisioned clever traps and strategies that could turn the tide against Finch's tyranny. In the depths of his mind, memories of Clara surged forth, her laughter, her unwavering belief in his strength. She had always seen the fighter within him, even when he had long since stopped believing in himself. With each recollection, Walter felt his resolve solidify. To honor her memory was to protect their daughter at any cost. As he walked through his dilapidated cabin, Walter began gathering tools and supplies, repurposing old equipment into instruments of revenge. The quiet man who once accepted his fate was no more. A storm brewed inside him, ready to unleash all that had been pent up for too long. Determination coursed through his veins as he planned each move with precision. He would not allow Finch to continue wreaking havoc. This time he would be the one striking fear into the heart of the outlaw. The battle lines were drawn, the time for silence was over. Walter Miller was ready to reclaim his life and prove that even the broken could rise up against evil when pushed to their limits. With newfound determination coursing through his veins, Walter Miller began to map out a plan, utilizing every inch of his land as a potential weapon against Finch Rawley's crew. He knew the terrain better than anyone, having toiled over it for years had given him an intimate understanding of its secrets. As he surveyed the fields, ideas sparked in his mind like flint striking stone. Walter set to work, repurposing old tools and materials into ingenious booby traps designed to catch Finch's men off guard. He rigged abandoned farm equipment with sharp blades hidden among tall grass, creating deadly obstacles that would ensnare unsuspecting intruders. In the wooded areas surrounding his cabin, he constructed tripwires connected to swinging logs, simple yet effective mechanisms that could incapacitate even the most alert marauders. He also remembered the natural hazards of Crater's Hollow. With careful planning, Walter positioned boulders along narrow paths where the gang was likely to approach. A well-placed push could send a rock tumbling down, creating chaos among their ranks and buying him precious time. Each trap was not merely a physical barrier but a psychological one, meant to instill fear in Finch's crew and demonstrate that Walter was no longer an easy target. As he worked tirelessly, memories of Clara's laughter fueled his resolve. She had always believed in his ability to outsmart those who underestimated him. This spirit lingered like a whisper in the back of his mind. Every time he felt doubt creep in, he would recall her encouraging words and the fierce love they shared. From dawn until dusk, Walter transformed his property into a fortress of cunning design. The quiet farmer who once lived in despair was gone. In his place stood a man ready to defend what remained of his family with everything he had. The time for vengeance was close at hand, and Walter was prepared to turn the tables on Finch Rawley. Each trap laid was a step closer to reclaiming Anna and restoring justice for all those who had suffered under the outlaw's reign. With every passing day, hope intertwined with strategy. He was no longer just fighting for survival, he was igniting a rebellion against tyranny itself. The moment had arrived. Walter paced through the fields, his heart pounding with a mix of fear and anticipation. He had set his traps carefully, but now he would finally see if his carefully laid plans could endure against the unpredictability of Finch's men. It was late afternoon, the sun dipping low in the sky, casting long shadows that blended seamlessly into the terrain he knew so well. As he took his position behind a cluster of boulders, Walter spotted a figure from Finch's gang approaching, one of the more reckless henchmen known for his brashness. The man swaggered forward, his attention focused on the path ahead, entirely unaware of the dangers lurking in Walter's meticulously engineered landscape. With a swift inhale, Walter steadied himself. As the gang member stepped into a clearing marked by tall grass, he triggered Walter's trap. A wooden beam swung down with alarming speed, knocking the man off balance and sending him tumbling into an adjacent pit that Walter had dug just deep enough to hold him captive but not harm him severely. A triumphant spark ignited within Walter as he rushed forward, adrenaline coursing through him like fire. The outlaw squirmed in surprise and confusion, shouting for help while futilely trying to climb out. "You think you can come here and take what's mine?" Walter called out, his voice firm with newly found confidence. This confrontation was not just about survival, it was a reclaiming of power and agency. The fight against fear was overshadowed by this small victory. A rush of hope surged within him as he realized that he could outsmart those who had once terrorized him. As Walter prepared to interrogate the captured henchman for information about Anna's whereabouts, he felt Clara's spirit beside him, her belief in his resilience resonating deeply in this moment. He realized that every trap set around his land wasn't merely physical defenses, but symbols of defiance against Finch Rawley's oppressive reign. This confrontation marked a turning point. It was proof that despite his losses and the crushing weight of despair, he could craft a future worth fighting for. With each breath, Walter schemed anew, drawing closer to reclaiming Anna and dismantling the tyranny that had long plagued Crater's Hollow. The war had begun, and he would not fight it alone any longer. In the quiet moments between ambushes, Walter Miller found himself enveloped in a heavy cloak of isolation. The vastness of Crater's Hollow stretched around him, a stark reminder of the life he had once shared with Clara and now faced alone. As he moved about his land, gathering tools and reinforcing traps, memories flooded his mind, echoes of laughter intertwined with recollections of loss that threatened to drown him. Each day was a battle against despair. Walter would often pause, leaning against the rough bark of an old tree that had witnessed both joyful days and sorrowful nights. The weight of his past hung heavily upon him, yet there was an undeniable fire igniting in his chest. He could still hear Clara's voice urging him forward. "You have strength within you, Walter, never forget that." It was this belief that propelled him through the darkness. As he prepared for another confrontation with Finch's men, Walter found solace in the meticulous nature of his preparations. He would map out his traps under the fading light, envisioning how each one would play out against the unsuspecting outlaws. His hands trembled slightly as he worked, partly from anxiety but mostly from anticipation. With every knot tied and every blade sharpened, he felt a sense of purpose crystallizing within him. Walter knew that this fight was not just for Anna, it was also for Clara's memory and for every farmer who had suffered under Finch's reign. Each trap became a symbol of resistance, a declaration that fear would no longer dictate their lives. However, the emotional turmoil lingered beneath the surface. In moments of quiet reflection, doubts crept in like shadows. Would he be able to save Anna? Would vengeance quench his thirst for justice or merely lead to more bloodshed? But as night fell and stars began to dot the sky, illuminating the land with their faint glow, Walter steeled himself with resolve. He would confront these fears head-on. He owed it to Clara and Anna to fight until his last breath. The isolation he'd felt transformed into a fierce determination, a call to arms against tyranny that resonated deep within his soul. With each passing day, Walter prepared not only for battle but also for redemption for himself, for his daughter, and for all who had been silenced by fear. The sun dipped below the horizon, casting a crimson hue across Crater's Hollow as Walter Miller took a deep breath, steeling himself for the confrontation ahead. The air was thick with tension, charged with the promise of impending violence. This moment had been building for weeks, each trap he set and every plan he made culminating in an intense showdown with Finch Rawley. Walter stood at the edge of his land, a stark silhouette against the fiery sky. He could feel the weight of his past pressing down on him, memories of Clara flashing through his mind like lightning, her laughter, her unwavering support, her belief that he could overcome any obstacle. It was this belief that transformed him from a defeated farmer into a fierce warrior prepared to reclaim everything that had been stripped away from him. As darkness enveloped the valley, Walter took his position behind a cluster of boulders, eyes scanning the terrain for any sign of Finch's approach. Each shadow in the distance felt alive, and with every passing moment his heart pounded louder, an echo of both fear and determination. This was not just about saving Anna. It was about standing up against tyranny, about reclaiming his power as a father and protector. Finally, the outline of Finch's gang emerged from the shadows, their laughter cutting through the silence like a knife. Walter's mouth tightened into a grim line as he recalled every moment of anguish they had inflicted upon him and others in Crater's Hollow. The time for fear was over. He had prepared meticulously, and now it was time to execute his plan. As Finch and his men ventured closer, they triggered the first of Walter's traps, a concealed pit that swallowed one of the henchmen whole. Chaos erupted among them as they scrambled to regain control, but Walter stayed focused, moving stealthily through the darkness. He felt alive in a way he hadn't in years. Each successful maneuver only fueled his resolve further. When he finally confronted Finch face to face, a figure who had once seemed invincible, Walter felt an unexpected calm wash over him. The culmination of his grief and rage crystallized into clarity. He wasn't just fighting for himself or Anna, he was fighting for every soul who had been silenced by Finch's reign. In that moment it became clear, Walter Miller had transformed into a force to be reckoned with, ready to unleash justice on those who had long ruled through fear. The climactic showdown was not just a battle of strength, it was a reckoning for all who had suffered under oppression. The final confrontation was upon Walter Miller, and as he stepped into the clearing where Finch Rawley awaited, every nerve in his body vibrated with a mix of adrenaline and resolve. The air was thick with tension, laden with the memories of all who had suffered under Finch's brutal regime, and Walter felt the ghosts of his past urging him forward. He stood tall, no longer the quiet farmer who had once cowered in fear, but a man transformed by grief, love, and an unyielding spirit. Finch lounged against a tree, accompanied by a few of his henchmen, exuding an arrogance that had come to define his reign of terror. "Well, if it isn't the one-armed farmer," Finch sneered, his voice dripping with condescension. "Did you really think you could challenge me for what, your precious daughter?" Walter's heart burned with anger at the sight of this man who had stolen his wife's life and now threatened his daughter's future. "You won't take anything else from me, Finch," he replied, his voice steady yet fierce. The moment resonated. The culmination of years of pain and loss gave Walter the strength he had never known. As Finch gestured to his men to advance, Walter unleashed the first of his traps, a spring-loaded mechanism that sent one henchman sprawling to the ground with a yelp. The chaos broke Finch's bravado, but he quickly regained composure, drawing his weapon. However, Walter was already a step ahead. The traps he had laid all around the clearing activated in rapid succession. One by one the outlaws fell victim to their own arrogance. In your thirst for power, you overlooked the very ground beneath your feet, Walter called out, exhilaration building within him as he witnessed Finch's crew faltering. They were no longer invincible, they were vulnerable, just like the families they had terrorized. In that moment, Walter advanced toward Finch with purpose. This encounter was not merely a battle for survival, it was an emotional reckoning, a confrontation between a father seeking justice and a tyrant who thrived on fear. As they faced off, Walter felt Clara's presence guiding him, her belief in him igniting a fire that burned brighter than ever before. With each step closer to Finch, Walter embodied the very essence of vengeance and resilience. This was not just a fight, it was a reclaiming of dignity, a declaration against tyranny. Walter was ready to end the cycle of fear that had plagued Crater's Hollow for too long. He would not stop until justice was served, not only for himself but for every soul who had suffered under Finch Rawley's reign. The final showdown had become not just personal but a pivotal moment where hope intertwined with the fight for justice. In the aftermath of the intense showdown, the air in Crater's Hollow felt different, charged with a new sense of possibility. Walter Miller stood amid the remnants of the battle, breathless but resolute, as he surveyed the scene around him. Finch Rawley lay defeated, his reign of terror finally shattered, and with it, the chains that had bound the farmers in fear for far too long. Walter's heart raced as he took in the faces of his neighbors. Those who had once cowered in silence now looked upon him with a mixture of gratitude and newfound hope. The community, battered and broken by Finch's cruelty, was beginning to feel the first stirrings of liberation. Families emerged from their homes to witness the dawn of a new era, their eyes shining with determination and resilience. Though the victory came at great personal cost, with Clara's memory still heavy on his heart, Walter felt her presence guiding him through this pivotal moment. He had confronted the man who had taken everything from him and emerged victorious not just for himself but for all who had suffered under Finch's tyranny. It was a bittersweet triumph, a testament to loss transformed into strength. As he walked through the crowd, Walter could sense a shift in the atmosphere. Whispers of rebuilding and healing filled the air. The farmers began to discuss how they would reclaim their land, unshackled from fear's grip. For the first time in years, laughter and conversation flowed freely. Walter shared stories with his neighbors, binding them together through shared pain and hopes for a brighter future. But beyond this moment of solace, Walter knew that challenges lay ahead. Finch Rawley was not merely an outlaw. He had been a representation of deeper societal injustices that needed to be addressed. The community would need to work together to ensure that no one would rise to power through fear again. In those quiet moments after the chaos, Walter realized that while he had avenged Clara and rescued Anna, the fight for true justice was far from over. It would require vigilance and unity among the farmers to foster an environment where tyranny could never take root again. With renewed purpose, Walter made a silent vow, not only to protect his family but also to stand guard over the newfound freedom of Crater's Hollow. The future was uncertain, but it was theirs to shape at last. As the dust settled in Crater's Hollow, Walter Miller reflected on the profound changes he had undergone throughout this harrowing journey. No longer just a one-armed farmer haunted by loss, he had transformed into a symbol of resistance against tyranny. The defeat of Finch Rawley marked not only a personal victory, but a pivotal moment for the entire community, which had long suffered under fear's oppressive weight. Walter understood that true reclaiming of one's life from fear was not simply about vengeance. It was about fostering hope and resilience in the face of adversity. The battle against Finch had been brutal, but it had also ignited a spark within the farmers. This newfound unity became their strength as they began to rebuild their lives and their land. Together, they discussed plans for planting new crops, reinforcing their homes, and establishing a sense of safety that had been absent for far too long. However, Walter was keenly aware that the cycle of violence could easily resurface if not addressed. The end of Finch's reign was merely the first step in dismantling the culture of fear that had permeated their lives. He knew they must remain vigilant against any potential threats, whether they came from remnants of Finch's gang or new oppressors who might seek to exploit their vulnerability. With Clara's memory guiding him, Walter felt the responsibility to lead his community in this pivotal transition. Their shared suffering forged bonds that transcended individual pain. He saw firsthand how collective healing could empower them all. As he rallied his neighbors, Walter spoke passionately about building a future where justice prevailed over tyranny, a future where no one would have to live in fear again. As the sun rose over Crater's Hollow, bathing the landscape in golden light, Walter stood alongside his friends and neighbors with a renewed sense of purpose. The path ahead would be challenging, but together they were prepared to face whatever adversities lay ahead. Walter's journey had taught him that reclaiming one's life meant embracing vulnerability while also nurturing resilience, a delicate balance that would become the foundation for their new beginning. United under this vision, they were ready to ensure that Crater's Hollow would never again fall prey to the darkness that had threatened to consume them for so long.